All right, so for this episode of Microgenres, I want to explore the tales of the Dragon Inn, or Dragon Gate Inn, or say hello to the new tales of Flying Sword Gate on Dragon Gate Inn. Gate! So the first movie that we're talking about is Dragon Inn, aka Dragon Gate Inn in 1967. Just think of this as the 1967 version because the name game gets a little confusing as we go forward. It takes place during the Ming Dynasty. The year is 1457. That means nothing to me, so let's do a little history lesson for context, and the whole plot will make a lot more sense. The Ming Dynasty lasted from the 1300s to the 1600s. It's a pretty good run, and during that time, various emperors were expanding their influence and empire, constructing much of the Great Wall, creating the Forbidden City, controlling the military with over 1 million soldiers and a tax system, using farmers to subsidize it. By the 1600s, the Ming had overextended themselves and were squeezing the farmers for impossible taxes, and there was a lot of unrest. That's obviously a simplified version of events, but it's good enough for our purposes. Our story kind of represents the tipping point of the thriving Ming Dynasty to an empire in decline due to excess. Well, sort of an epilogue to the tipping point. See, there's this little bit of drama called the Tumu Crisis in 1449. Now, remember that the movie takes place in 1457, so it's only 8 years later. Okay, so the Ming are being attacked by the Mongols, and the emperor is convinced by his trusted eunuch to go out with his army to show his strength. Long story short, the emperor was kidnapped by the Mongols, who hold him for ransom. The only problem is that the Ming don't care, and they just make the emperor's brother the new emperor and tell the Mongols to go fuck themselves. Now, back at home, in Beijing, they are still being attacked by the Mongols, and the old emperor's minister of war, that's like the highest rank of general, Yu Qian, is the one that's coordinating the defense, and he gains favor with the new emperor. That's the brother, right, that's not kidnapped. Now, years pass, like 4 years. The Mongols have the old emperor held hostage, and eventually they release him for some like lame treaty deal or a trade deal or whatever, and they send him back home, and he has to agree to relinquish all claim to his former power and like go off and disappear. Now, he agrees, but instead he comes back, stages a coup, and then promptly declares his former minister of war, Yu Qian, a traitor and has him executed. And now we start the movie. Okay, so that's all real. That's like historical stuff, facts. Yu Qian's a real guy. I reduced the timeline of events down for simplicity, but I encourage people to read about it all on Wikipedia. There's all kinds of other cool and gnarly stuff, like the chief Mongol who kidnapped the emperor was also exposed as a weak leader after all those years of holding him hostage because he didn't get a good deal when they did their trade deal negotiation, and his own people assassinated him only a few years later. Our movie starts as Yu Qian is executed, and now the plot becomes about his children who are going to be exiled to Dragon Inn, this remote outpost. But the emperor wants Yu Qian's bloodline ended, so he sends out his chief eunuch to find them and kill them at the Dragon Inn. Now, let's just talk about eunuchs for a second. Eunuchs have special powers in kung fu movies. When you cut off your junk, I guess it allows you to focus and not be distracted on the pursuits of physical pleasure. I don't know. But they all turn evil in these movies, and in reality they did hold a fair amount of power in these dynasties. So eunuchs are in control doing their evil kung fu. This is a story of political machinations, maintaining power. The eunuchs control a CIA or FBI-like branch of the government called the East Bureau, and after executing top general Yu Qian, they now want to sever his bloodline and kill any children that he might have. The children, as I said, have been exiled to Dragon Inn. So what you've got is this isolated location, various actors and players and agents who are all arriving and trying to figure out who each of them are and what they want, if they're allies or assassins. There's this tension throughout the film. It's like a kung fu suspense film. It has very much a sense of what Tarantino was brewing up in Hateful Eight. I wouldn't be shocked at all if Tarantino was inspired by Dragon Inn. It's focused on a remote outpost where deadly assassins are holed up, sussing each other out during a snowstorm or sandstorm, as is the case with Dragon Inn, poisoning each other and guessing each other's motives. The first half of the movie I found more taut and tense, more interesting than the classic kung fu battles that the movie becomes by the end. but it was still a box office smash when it came out, and it is a formative classic wuxia movie that is largely responsible for the Crouching Tigers and other Three Kingdoms movies that came out afterwards. And for such a prestigious, anointed classic, a formative cornerstone of kung fu cinema, I'd be remiss if I didn't at least mention the director King Fu. Now, I don't know if he's analogous to Chinese Akira Kurosawa, but he does have a couple other undeniable classics under his belt, like Come Drink With Me and A Touch of Zen. Now, if you're not into the super old school kung fu movies, maybe you'd prefer a Jackie Chan or Jet Li era 90s kung fu film. We can hop over to 1992, where we get the first remake, New Dragon Gate Inn, or New Dragon Inn, or just Dragon Inn, like it says on my Tai Seng DVD. So the 1992 remake was produced by Choi Hark and directed by Raymond Lee and Choi Hark. And again, this is the same basic plot. General Yu is executed, now the eunuchs are after those pesky kids at Dragon Inn. Let's talk about what makes the 1992 version different. This movie does what early 90s Hong Kong cinema does best, throwing everything in the pot and cranking it all to 11. If there are arrows, there are hundreds of arrows. When there's stunt work and action scenes, they are extensive, faster and more dynamic, to the point of ridiculousness, like a guy holding onto the end of a sword and getting waved around like he weighs nothing. When there's political intrigue and characters pretending to be other characters, you might be confused. Or maybe that's just me. It's much more sexual, much more made of women pretending to be men. The comedy's more broad, there's more innuendo, more slapstickiness, and it's gory, too. Like, never mind the Sweeney Todd angle that they have where they chop up people and cook them and serve them to their patrons, but it's just bloodier in general. There's even a scene where this guy gets crushed between two big mechanical cogs, and the gushing blood running like a river down the machine is scooped up in a bucket and then thrown in an enemy's eyes. Multiple people are beheaded. The final fight scene alone is one of the most gruesome that I've ever seen in a mainstream kung fu flick. Now, I won't say too much, but there's a character shown to be able to fillet a carcass down to the meaty bone in a matter of a few choice slices, and he makes use of that very specific skill in a comedic and grotesque way. And the cast is super stacked, with Donnie Yen as our evil super eunuch, Bridget Lin, who made something of a career playing women pretending to be men like Royal Tramp 2 and Peking Opera Blues, does exactly that in this film as well, and the amazing Maggie Cheung, who at the time was perhaps known for Jackie Chan's Police Story and similar roles, was somewhat breaking away from expectations for Dragon Inn, where she plays a deadly femme fatale, but no less adorable. This is an improvement in each facet of the filmmaking and offers a larger meal for the viewer, more complex story, fight scenes, cinematography, and yet what's lost in a way is the consistently serious tone of the original. But if you're a fan of the late 80s and early 90s Hong Kong cinema, then this melange of tones and mixing of genres is just going to be comfort food for you. But hey, if that wasn't quite your flavor, maybe you were looking for something with more spectacle and grandeur. Well then hold on to your flying swords, because we're going places now, people. Flying Swords of Dragon Gate, 3D from 2011. Story-wise, this is more of a remix. Choi Hark is back again to direct, and he calls it a reimagining, which is, I think, a fair assessment, though. It has all the familiar elements: the evil eunuchs, the sandstorm, the inn, the desire to end a bloodline, women disguised as men. It's all here, but the new story is revised. They were after children of a recently executed general in the original, and now instead we're attempting to kill a courtesan who's pregnant with the emperor's illegitimate child. This is one of those movies that when you don't watch the 3D version, you're constantly being reminded by the special effects, and yes, this was made for 3D. And while the special effects are good, they feel a little sterile at times or artificial. On the other hand, this is the most rich visual palette of the three, with the most beautiful photography, and the sets are incredibly lush and detailed and textured. As are the costumes, by the way, but the entire movie is kind of overwrought with spectacle, and every CG element that's woven into the fight scenes seems to draw attention to itself as not being particularly real. The cast is an ensemble of characters, but the main draw would have to be Jet Li and Gordon Liu, who's the master killer, and he has a cameo at the start as a particularly well-pickled eunuch.
呢兩個石碑上面挑咗啲咩字啊？
碑文上邊係400年前嘅西夏文，長年風沙侵蝕，只得頭尾龍門兩個字係最清楚，所以呢個地方叫做龍門。
So maybe this one's got the best visual, and the 90s one has the best choreography, and the 67 version has the best tone and mood. And then we have one last entry on the list. Dragon Tiger Gate. No, I'm just messing with you. Dragon Tiger Gate is a Donnie Yen adaptation of an entirely unrelated comic book, and has absolutely zero to do with anything with Dragon Gate in outside the title's similarity and inevitable confusion. The real final selection for this list is called Goodbye Dragon Inn from 2003. This is a Taiwanese art house drama about the last night of an old movie house which happens to be screening the 1967 Dragon Inn for the final time. The theater's seen better days and it's dilapidated and run down, a shadow of its former glory. There's a beautiful symmetry in this old Taiwanese theater playing Dragon Inn, because King Hu left Hong Kong after his previous film Come Drink With Me. He broke away from the studios to make Dragon Inn in Taiwan. As a cultural landmark for Taiwan, Dragon Inn would have played in this theater many times, I would imagine. And now here it is playing at the end, the exact same magnificent movie in the same theater, but with a completely different context. It becomes a little haunting. But it's also got a sense of humor. In the film, there are cameos from two actors who were in the original 67 film, playing themselves here in Goodbye Dragon Inn. Miao Qian plays himself, bringing his grandson to see the film that he was in over 30 years ago, and then he and co-star Shi Chun have a brief reunion in the lobby. Now, whatever progression was made in the last two remakes with the dynamism of the action and the frenetic cuts and the editing, it's completely antithetical to the style of this movie. These are long, slow cuts, each shot averaging well over a minute of screen time. Like no joke, okay? In the first 7 minutes, we watch a single shot of a lady eating her lunch in silence for over 2.5 minutes. Like, that's the whole movie for pacing here. I read somewhere online that it was meant to be a short film, but the long cuts made a theatrical runtime possible. I could believe that easily. There's a scene where we watch that lady cleaning up the theater and then leave, and we just sit there in the empty theater feeling the emptiness of the room. Like, it's that kind of movie. This is it sped up, by the way, this shot. And like, look how long the shot holds on absolutely nothing. It's like the audacity of just leaving us there, like we've got nothing better to do. And this is sped up. I mean, should somebody say cut? I can't believe he held this for so long. Like, why? Okay. Look, this is a vibe. You're either into the slow contemplative journey of the last day of these workers, or you're not. One of the patrons is looking for a random hookup and spends the movie wandering around the back hallways. What I liked about the movie is mostly in concept, to have an entire film really inhabit a space like a theater to celebrate one of the all-time greats almost as a ghost, a representation of the time when Dragon Inn was released and the theater was in better condition. Sitting in the leaky halls and stairwells and just absorbing the space and the environment is actually really cool. Anytime that they're in the theater while Dragon Inn is playing is also great. The soundtrack of the film is the soundtrack of Dragon Inn. I have to say I'm pretty happy that I rewatched the original before watching this movie, so that it was more familiar to me and it wasn't as distracting while I was watching Goodbye Dragon Inn. All right, well, that's it. That's all 4 movies. I really look forward to the next incarnation of the story, maybe being a little closer to the original, with the mystery of the motives of all the players hidden from each other in a remote inn, and watching it play out with the tension that's inherent to that plot, with less emphasis on huge action set pieces and the grandeur of the backdrop of the story, focusing more like on the intimacy of the cramped locale during the sandstorm. Actually, now that I think about it, like, the Hateful Eight is that version in many ways. In fact, Hollywood remakes anything that they can appropriate. Maybe it's time for a reversal, a Chinese remake of the Hateful Eight titled The Hateful Dragon Gate.